I'm here with Jamie and Danny, game designers in... Where are you guys at?
In Austria.
So you're both in Austria in different cities. Danny, you're in...
Yes.
In Graz.
And I'm in Vienna.
All righty.
We founded the studio after we'd already settled, and we thought we'll just work remotely. It's easy.
Right now, yeah, not only easier but legal.
Turned out to be a good decision. Yeah.
Yeah. Not to mention it saves money on renting an office.
This is true. This is very true.
Yes. Well, hey, last time I talked to you, Jamie, we were talking about your game, Immortality. Have I got the title right?
Yep.
Okay. I unfortunately never really played the game. I had I think an early version on my machine, and there was something about the flow of play that I wasn't quite grokking, and I was kind of stalled out.
That's understandable. It went through a lot of iterations, and even in its final state, it's not quite for everyone. I feel like if it's not the kind of game for you, you'll probably get as much out of it by just sort of clicking around the interface and looking at the different agendas and laughing at them. But you'll have as much fun doing that as you will actually playing it if it doesn't quite work with your brain. So
that game was a cyberpunk themed take over the world with corporate finance, as I recall.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. You sort of get more powerful over time, you sell more stuff, you bribe more politicians, and eventually you start to kind of take over entire countries and take over the world. Yeah.
And to fund that game, you ran a Kickstarter account, which was a successful campaign, right?
It was, exactly. And so we've thought we might do it again.
So now you've got a new game and a new campaign. I noticed your goal was a very specific amount. I think it was, 8,750?
8,000. It's exactly,
right.
That's the currency thing. It's exactly 8,000 euros, and so that will change depending on what currency you're in. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's not that we were like, oh no, 8,754. No, the budget.
Not going to cut it.
So Danny, you and I have not spoken before. We were talking just a little bit before Jamie showed up about your history in game design. And if you would just run through that real quick.
Absolutely. So this is my first foray into the world of for-profit video games. Before this, I started off as an analog game designer, saw some amount of success there, won a few competitions with the 200-word RPG challenge, and was a finalist for Game Chef 2016 with some pen and paper tabletop RPG storytelling sort of things. Since then, I started a master's program of game studies and engineering in the tiny town of Klagenfurt, of all places. So yeah, this official full-time position is actually fulfilling my internship requirement. And then it's just a thesis left to write. So good thing I'm in quarantine. Theoretically, I could really buckle down and get to that.
Not going to happen.
Not yet, anyway.
So we were just talking about your first game or your previous game. I don't think it was your first game, Jamie.
Not quite. It was my first properly commercial one, but it there were others before that didn't make as much or indeed any money.
But you're a filthy capitalist nonetheless. This is all for profit.
I've dove into the system. Yeah, exactly.
All right. So you get to pay rent and such.
I mean, I don't want to, but yeah.
Yes, well, you get to. So tell me about the new game.
So the new game, it's called Silicone Dreams, and like you said, it's on Kickstarter right now. It's a game a little bit inspired by Blade Runner, which is a movie where there are basically cops who interrogate androids in a cyberpunk future. And these androids look very much like humans, and so in the movie they can't tell whether they're real like humans or whether they're these artificial robots that just look very much like humans and are 100% convincing. So we decided to run with that, and in our game, you're also interviewing these androids, but rather than just sort of deciding whether or not they are an android or they aren't an android, we thought it would be more interesting if you were given different questions, and most of those questions pertain to the androids' life experiences or their emotions, or whether they're capable of feeling certain emotions at the same time, for example. So in this game, you have to sort of sit down, interview these androids. You have to answer these questions that have been given to you by the company in this report. But as you're doing that, you're uncovering interesting tidbits about the lives of these androids. And so we're hoping that it's not just a game where you have to interview them and get this information out, though you can play it that way. We're hoping that it will be a game where you interview them and you come to sort of you discover who they are as people, and that way you make a connection with these characters. It's almost like Spin Mortality was a very big game, which was about sort of the big picture of capitalism across the entire globe. And we're now shrinking that all the way down to you just having this one-on-one conversation with another kind of victim of capitalism, even though that person may not be technically human.
Have you both read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
Well, I have. I'm actually in the middle of a read right now.
I have not, surprisingly. Despite having come up with the tagline for the game, which is very much inspired by that game, or that book, rather.
What's the tagline?
Androids may dream of electric sheep, but perhaps they dream of so much more.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is the source material for Blade Runner.
Yes.
The movie is very, very different from the book.
Yeah, they took a lot of liberties. They really ran with it.
Yes, but the questions that the police officers ask the androids, the text of the questions is verbatim from the book. That's the one thing that really made it from the page onto the screen almost unchanged. And that seems to be, at the heart of your game, the questioning of the androids. What's your motivation as a player? Are you collecting points, or are you amassing money, or, how's the game, how is your progress quantified?
So we've distilled this experience of this Voight-Kampff test from Blade Runner, and we sort of turned it on its head a little bit. And like Jamie said, rather than trying to figure out if your interrogation subject is android or human, we have put the player themselves in the role of an android. And so they are taking on an identical state of being, posing this question of personhood to the player while we're asking them to interrogate these other androids. And so the metric then becomes appeasing this company, both the manufacturer of the androids, the subject, and the avatar of the player, as well as your boss. And so you're performing these interrogations and doing this troubleshooting to fulfill your role. And so I wouldn't say it's the metric, the scoring system in the game, but one of the most prominent and one of the most visible is your company rating. How well the company values your performance and has judged you for your success on accomplishing the tasks they've set for you.
Go ahead.
So as Danny said, you are also an android, so you're kind of owned by the company. And that means that if the company so deems, you can also be switched off. So that means that it's your job to make sure that doesn't happen. Right. For obvious reasons. So you can probably see it. If you can see the slideshow, you'll see it sort of swishing through. There's one image that has a gigantic A+ in the middle. That is your company ranking. And the thinking is that if it's really high, then the company thinks, oh, this android is doing a great job interrogating these androids and feeding us information. If it's really low, then they're thinking about shutting you off. So it's your job to, when you fill in the report, when you're interviewing these androids, you have to make sure that you answer enough of those questions correctly. And if you answer them correctly, your score will go up. And if you get them wrong, then the score will go down. What complicates this is that if you answer them all correctly, some of the androids you're talking to might get shut down, and you might not want that to happen. So let's say that you're interviewing someone, and you really like this person that you're interviewing, this android, and you realize that they really hate the company. And then there's a question in the report which says, does this person hate Kronos Robotics? Does this person hate us, the company? And you could answer truthfully, and you could bump up your rating a little bit. But you might think to yourself, well, I kind of like this person, and I think if I answer this question, they might just get, wiped by the company. So maybe I should be a little untruthful. So it's this balancing act where you want to feed the company the information, enough correct information to keep you alive. But if you choose carefully when to lie to them or to feed them some misinformation, then you can figure out how to like keep the other androids that you're interviewing alive if you decide that you like them.
Is there a viable dark side path here? Can you choose to be Black Hat William from Westworld and just really do everything you can to be the ruthless, efficient android interrogator for the company?
Yeah, you absolutely can. And in that case, then your goal is to maximize that ranking. So then the ranking itself just becomes like, a point system, effectively. And whereas if you choose to play like the light path, then it's less about making it as high as possible, and it's more about avoiding it hitting the bottom.
Danny, why don't you start with this one?
All right.
How do you distribute tasks and basically decide who's going to do what?
Well, we start from a very simple point in that Jamie can program and I cannot.
Okay.
So my skill set lies pretty firmly in project management, organization, sort of these background tasks. I've also been dipping my toes into 3D modeling, art assets, a lot of the dialogue writing I've taken on. But we've actually struck a really nice balance delegating these tasks in a way that it works for all of us. I'm learning a little bit of programming on the side while taking some of the load off from Jamie's plate. In comparison to Spin Mortality, he had to do everything, all of the writing, all of the art assets, all of the programming. And now with this experience, we're able to sort of split that up a little bit more, where he can focus on the programming and I can sort of take on everything else to a certain extent. It's not so cut and dry, but
exactly. Like the one area where it's like a little bit less, it's not absolutely split down those lines, is that I try to do a pass on every email we send out or every blog post we update or that kind of thing. I write a few blog posts myself. I also I'm trying very hard to do some of the writing of the actual characters, because that's the fun bit.
That's the fun bit, yeah.
But yeah, exactly. All of those background tasks that that I'm not particularly especially good at, and that Danny can easily take on. He's doing a great job with all of those, letting me mostly sort of get stuck into the coding.
Which is not where you want to be, it sounds like. Not exclusively.
Not exclusively. I don't mind it. I do enjoy it. It's just that, and I'm very happy that I don't have to do all of the PR research and looking up, finding new streamers and new places to to tell people about the game, and all of that sort of marketing stuff is largely off my plate now. But yes, I'd love to do more writing, but I think the system has to sort of be done first, and that's just a part of the game, really.
Yeah.
Going back to Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? As I say, there are many ways in which the book and the film are different, thematically even. For example, in the film, the ultimate message seems to be that the androids really do have internal lives and they're capable of empathy and compassion and whatnot. In the book, they're absolutely not. They're just not. They are what they are claimed to be. They are, facsimiles of human beings who do not have the full range of human cognitive and emotional capacities. What are the androids like in your game?
Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I'll start it off anyway. You can fill in the gaps if I miss anything. We are leaning much more towards the film in terms of how we're presenting these androids, in that we want to paint a bit of a gray area and pose the question to the players that clearly these are not humans. That is readily apparent, but we're very interested in exploring the question of, even if they are not human, should they be granted personhood, or should they be considered in the same way as humans are, just for the fact that they have emotional experiences, that they have a personality, that they have this internal life that they explore. And I think for me, that's one of the most interesting things about this, is that we're posing that question not only for the player to answer about the subjects that they're interacting with, but also the player avatar themselves, that you are also an android. And so the metrics that you apply when you're judging or filling the report for these subjects logically should be applied to your character as well, because you are one of these things.
Which was a theme in Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah, which was actually that was perhaps the most direct inspiration for me. I actually wrote a blog post about that, which you can find on our blog. But basically, I felt that the original Blade Runner kind of asked the question, are these things human? Or should they be respected as humans? And it felt like by the time we got round to Blade Runner 2049, that question had kind of become like just sort of accepted. And they sort of wanted to take this world and this sort of framing device in a new direction. And so I enjoyed how they kind of they sort of just assumed that everyone who is an AI or an android is still a person. And then they sort of used that to talk about what it's like to live in a world that doesn't consider you to be a person. And that sort of was the spark that kind of got me interested. Because the question of, we watch films about androids and we assume that the question, who is a human, has always been answered. Like, we're all humans, obviously we're all like people, so theoretically we're all kind of on the same level. And that actually hasn't been the case. If you look at the way that, for example, slaves and or black slaves were treated in Haiti, for example, there was literally a white mode of thought which considered black people to be a lower sort of species and assumed that they didn't have souls. So this question of like who gets to be a person, who gets to be an actual sentient being on the same level as me, is one that's kind of always dogged people. And it's just that the Android film sort of took it to a different level. So I'm sort of interested in using this game as a framing device to talk about, okay, what is it like being one of the people at the very bottom of the heap under capitalism in this sort of dystopian future? Right.
And whether in the real world or in the fictional worlds of Cyberpunk or Blade Runner, the present theme being that this is as one of these lower members in society, so to speak, this is not a question that you can answer. Someone else provides the answer to who is a person and who is worthy of value, who gets to be treated in this way.
Exactly. So then what you can do as a person who's sort of suffering under that system is you can either say, okay, well, this system is too big for me, I guess I'll just take whatever I can. And that's sort of the black hat route. Or you can say, I don't know whether my actions will make a difference, but I am going to act as ethically as I can, given the huge constraints placed upon me.
You know, I did a master's in the philosophy of mind back in the early 90s. And at the time, I was thinking that, prejudice against minds that are instantiated in silicon or, some other non-biological substrate, that there would be no basis for such prejudice. It would just be, bigotry. Now I occupy a very different sort of conceptual position in that it's clear that artificial intelligence, so-called, machine learning or training algorithms with big data sets, however you want to describe it, these things are capable of doing complex tasks, but they're not remotely sentient. I mean, there's not even any point in asking the question at this point.
Right.
And by the time they do come up, with some sort of sophisticated inner life, they're likely to be so superior to us in in a wide range of tasks, and really alien to us. And to me, the question of, the poor discriminated against androids, it seems like it's going to be sort of a historical novelty that, the actual situation will be nowhere close to that. I wonder what your thoughts are on that topic.
Yeah. I've been speaking a lot. If you'd like to take this one, Jamie, or
okay. I mean, my honest opinion, my best guess, and who knows if this is anywhere close to what will actually happen, is you're pretty much right. I do think that this question of there's robots that look like us and they actually feel it's not really about the robots. It's really about our attitude towards other humans and using science fiction to explore that.
Yep.
So I don't think that's a question that's actually going to come up. But just because it's not an accurate portrayal of the future doesn't mean that it's not kind of worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
Like if H.P. Lovecraft, for example, or if Stanislav Lem in Solaris had wanted to create stories about things that were only definitely plausibly going to happen, then they would have written very different stories and there would have been a lot more black holes. Instead, they gave us stories that are kind of less realistic, I think, but sort of more expressive, and that I think help people get into that mindset a bit more. So I think my justification for these androids in this fictional future is, well, it's almost as though for me, for some reason, because they believe it will sell, this company, Kronos, who are making these androids, have kind of bent the development of AI round almost in sort of a circle, so that they've forced these AIs to be like humans in a way that's very sort of unnatural in terms of like AI development. And that I'm kind of curious what would happen if these androids met like one of the AIs that you described, which are sentient but entirely alien, and sort of what that would feel like for them. We haven't planned on doing anything like that in the game, but I think it would be sort of a very strange experience for them, almost like meeting God or something.
Yeah, much like it would be for a human to meet one of these real-world AI that we've been discussing. I would say I definitely agree with you that if research were so inclined to explore the upper limits of what artificial intelligence can accomplish, we would absolutely end up with something very much not like the simulants of Blade Runner, and very much more something like 2001 HAL, right? So this sort of ultra intelligence, God level being, superhuman. However, I will say I also see a very real possibility that these advancements in AI will be artificially dumbed down and packaged into a nice consumer product, a la Alexa or Siri, right? This servant thing sold to people to make their lives better.
You know, did either one of you see the 1970s Battlestar Galactica TV show?
Ooh, that's much before my time.
Someone, I'm afraid.
Well, it is a show. Was it in the 70s or the early 80s? I think it was the late 70s. There was a sequel series in the early 80s. But the premise there is that the humans that live on these 12 colonies are at war with the cybernetic remnant of an alien race. And they have, you know, the origins of the Cylons have nothing to do with humanity. It's just that the Cylons died and their war machines carried on, and they found a new enemy in humans. So Ron Moore, when he comes to, you know, reimagine this series in the early 2000s, he did something I thought was brilliant at the time. He changed the origin of the Cylons to, as they spell out in the credits of every episode, humans created Cylons, the Cylons rebelled. And so that was, you know, one change. Another change was some of the Cylons now are indistinguishable from humans, which, you know, from a budgetary standpoint is a godsend.
Right.
You know,
it makes it much easier to do prosthetics and
Right. So now they're going to reboot Battlestar Galactica again.
Oh, Christ. Are they?
And I'm almost certain that they're going to keep the Ron Moore changes of making some Cylons indistinguishable from humans. And I hope they don't. I would much rather see the original premise played out. You know,
because I feel that I'm not sure which reboot I'm talking about now, but the one that I've seen, the one with Gaius Baltar, that one,
right?
I think that absolutely mined all the way into that concept as deep as you could go. I don't think you could better the way that they did that. So I agree with you. I think it's only really worth doing if they make a serious change and approach it from another angle.
But Hollywood, it's only worth doing if they think they can make a buck off it. So you're gonna copy the superficial aspects of whatever worked last. That's how they roll.
Of course.
What are some other science fiction properties that you take inspiration from and that people might see reflected in the game?
Well, the big two for me are Westworld and Humans. So Westworld obviously is about these sort of entertainment androids who don't know that they're androids.
Hosts.
They think that they're exactly. They think they're in a Wild West town. They're actually in a in like a fairground Wild West town where any human can come and can kill any android, and the android gets fixed overnight, and it's all good.
Kill, rape, humiliate, abuse, torture.
Yeah, all that fun stuff that makes you think about, oh God, what am I doing with my entertainment? Season 3 actually has just come out, and I've been following it closely because it actually it really opens up the world in this really interesting way. I've actually already taken some inspiration from just the first few episodes of that. So that's definitely like one of my favorites. And then the other one, Humans, is actually I think it's a BBC property. It's a TV show about basically the same premise as our game. There are human-looking robots that help in your home, and eventually some of them become sentient, and it's about, well, who gets to be real. What I find most interesting about that is just the way that because this TV show was made later than most of the other kind of Android stuff like Blade Runner, they were able to incorporate a bunch of sort of ideas into how this would actually work in real life that make it feel a bit more kind of grounded. Mm-hmm. One of the more disturbing parts of it, if I can go into sort of content warning territory, is one of the many of the androids come with R-rated features, which means that you can like speak a particular code phrase and they will then want to have sex with you, and they don't really have a choice in the matter. So it's basically android rape. And the disturbing thing is that I can absolutely see that happening just because of, the demand for R-rated properties and the fact that this would slot into that quite neatly, even if very unethically. So definitely those two.
Yeah. To really dumb down this whole genre, this whole type of media into two distinct categories, I'd say there's sort of like the half with social commentary, like Humans or Westworld, and then there's the more sort of like psychological, esoteric side of things, and I think that's where I draw a lot of my inspiration from. The movie Ex Machina would be a good example of that, as well as Ghost in the Shell, both the ScarJo reboot as well as the original manga anime, like the entire thing, the entire IP. And so I'm really fascinated by these questions of like the androids themselves coming to this realization, and what is that process like for them? How do they reconcile the differences they see in the world and what they feel internally versus what they're told by their manufacturers and their owners? And so the sort of like philosophical, conceptual side of things is really inspiring to me.
And we don't have time to delve into this topic in great detail, but I too am a big fan of Ghost in the Shell, and the big twist there is that a lot of the characters that you might think of as androids are cyborgs. They're biological human brains inside of very advanced, capable robotic bodies.
To some extent, sure. Yeah.
Kind of like the Scarlett Johansson movie.
I did too. Yeah.
I can't say it's a huge injustice that it didn't do well, but it's got its strengths, I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we're about out of time. So let me just ask you, let me just ask you to both summarize your thoughts and, plug the game as hard as you care to.
So, let's start with the social media plugs. We are Clockwork Bird. You can visit us on our website, clockworkbird.net. The Kickstarter for the game Silicone Dreams is currently running. We'll be live until May 7th. So if this is the kind of content and material that interests you, please consider checking that out. There is a free demo available for download. It's about an hour to an hour and a half of playtime. You can really just start to scratch the surface of the topics that we're hoping to explore and the type of game we're trying to present. Right, so now to plug the actual game itself. I think you would be interested in this if you saw Blade Runner and thought, ooh, the Voight-Kampff test. I wish I could do that. That's criteria number one. Criteria number two, if you play Detroit Become Human, but felt a little bit left behind by the way that they handle certain things, we're going to try and spend much more effort and much more energy getting into the depths of the personalities that you find in this game, and hopefully posing some interesting questions about what it means to be a person or an android, whether in this fictional space or in our reality. And thirdly, yeah, if you like cyberpunk, if you're interested in the questions raised by how massive corporations influence socioeconomics and laws, all of these considerations about what a person is and what a person's value is, whether that's intrinsic for their sense of self or whether that value comes from their buying power and their ability to contribute to a capitalistic system.
Exactly. And I'd say that, yeah, if you're interested in cyberpunk and maybe you skew more towards the sort of talky, thinky side of things rather than the exploding cyborg ninja side of things, this is the kind of game that taps into that sort of aspect. We also didn't get a chance to talk about it, but if you're interested in games that talk about like power dynamics just in a conversation, because in this game, one misspoken line of dialogue, one secret, one lie, one moment of anger spiking, because you see that on the Voight-Kampff machine, basically, can spell the difference between this android being saved and you deciding that this android needs to be destroyed. So it's about those sort of small acts of power, resistance, and exploitation within bigger capitalistic systems, just in like a one-on-one setting.
Sounds like it answers to most of my interests. The game again is Silicon Dreams, and there will be a link to the Kickstarter in the description for this video. All right. So Danny and Jamie, thanks so much.
I'm so glad that you were able to have us on KMO.